In the autumn of the year 1698, a new governor arrived to take charge of the most feared prison in France, the Bastille, that great stone fortress towering over the rooftops of Paris. And he did not arrive alone. He brought with him a prisoner. The man traveled in a closed carriage, guarded with extraordinary care, moved from a distant fortress to the heart of the capital under conditions of total secrecy. And there was something about this prisoner that no one who saw him would ever forget. His face was covered, always. A mask concealed his features, so that not a single guard, not a single servant, not a single soul in that fortress would ever know what he looked like. He had no name. In the records, he was referred to only in the vaguest terms: the long-time prisoner, the man from the southern fortress. Whoever he truly was, his identity had been erased as completely as if he had never been born. He would live in the Bastille for 5 more years, and when he finally died in November of 1703, the secrecy did not end with him. It is said that everything he had touched was destroyed, his clothes burned, his furniture broken apart, the very walls of his cell scraped and whitewashed in case he had scratched some message into the stone. He was buried under a false name, and the mask, the famous mask, vanished into history along with the face it had hidden. For more than 300 years, the world has been asking the same question. Who was he? This is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in all of European history. A man so dangerous, or so important, or so secret, that the most powerful king in the world went to extraordinary lengths to hide his face from history, and then to erase every trace that he had ever existed. And yet, for all that effort, the secret could not be buried completely. Just enough survived, just enough to tantalize, just enough to keep the question burning across the centuries. To understand the mystery, we have to follow the prisoner's strange journey, because the man in the mask did not appear out of nowhere at the Bastille. He had already been a prisoner for many years, moved quietly from fortress to fortress across France, always under the same cloud of total secrecy. Who was the man behind the mask? Why was his face so dangerous that it had to be hidden? What did he know, or what was he that made him a threat even in chains, even alone, even locked away at a stone cell at the top of a fortress? We may never know for certain, but the search for the answer leads us into the very heart of one of the most magnificent and ruthless courts the world has ever seen, the France of King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. So, step back into the age of powdered wigs and absolute power, into a world of secrets and silence, of locked doors and burned papers. And let us try, as so many have tried before us, to lift the mask. His story, as far as the surviving records allow us to trace it, begins decades earlier. Somewhere around the year 1669, the king's minister of war sent instructions to the governor of a remote mountain fortress. A prisoner was being sent to him. The orders were unusually precise and unusually severe. The man was to be held in a cell with multiple doors, one behind another, so that no guard standing outside could overhear a single word. He was to speak to no one. He was to be given the bare necessities of life and nothing more. And above all, if he ever dared to speak about anything other than his immediate needs, if he ever tried to reveal who he was to be killed on the spot. Think about the strangeness of that command. This was not how France treated ordinary criminals. Ordinary criminals were tried, sentenced, sometimes executed in public as a warning to others. But this man was the opposite of a public example. He was a secret to be kept. The whole point was that no one should ever know he existed, let alone who he was. And so he was hidden away, year after year, in one of the most isolated fortresses in the kingdom, a place perched high in the mountains near the border, far from prying eyes. The same jailer would watch over him for decades, a man named Saint Mars, whose career became permanently bound to this single mysterious prisoner. Wherever Saint Mars was promoted, wherever he was sent next, the prisoner went with him, carried along like a precious and dangerous piece of cargo that could not be left in anyone else's hands. From the mountain fortress to an island prison off the southern coast, and finally to the Bastille in Paris, the masked man followed his jailer across France, always guarded, always concealed, always silent, for more than 30 years. 30 years. Stop and consider that. A human being kept alive but erased for longer than many people of that age lived in total. Whoever he was not killed, and that itself is one of the deepest puzzles of the whole affair. If he was so dangerous, why not simply execute him and be done with it? If he was a traitor, a spy, an enemy of the state, the king had the power to remove him in an instant. But he was not removed. He was preserved, kept breathing in the dark, his face hidden, his name forgotten for 3 decades. There is another detail that makes the long imprisonment even stranger. Through all those years, across all those fortresses, the prisoner seems to have been treated with a peculiar mixture of cruelty and care. He was watched with relentless suspicion, cut off from all human contact, forbidden to speak his own name, and yet, at the same time, there are signs that he was not treated as a common wretch. Some accounts suggest he was given decent food, clean linen, even small comforts that ordinary prisoners could never have dreamed of. One report claims he was allowed fine shirts and lace, the sort of things a gentleman might wear. This is a strange combination, and it has fueled centuries of speculation. A man treated as a deadly secret, yet handled with a care that hints at high birth or some special status. It is as though his jailers had been ordered, in effect, to keep him alive and even comfortable, but utterly hidden. Not to punish him, not to break him, simply to make him disappear while keeping him safe. And who among all the prisoners of France would warrant such a contradictory command? That single fact tells us something profound. This was not a man the king wanted dead. This was a man the king wanted hidden. And the difference between those two things is the doorway into the entire mystery. To understand why such a thing could happen, why one man could be erased so completely, you have to understand the world that made it possible. You have to understand the France of Louis XIV. Louis was no ordinary king. He was the most powerful monarch in Europe, the ruler who famously embodied the idea of absolute royal power. The state, in his vision, was not separate from the king. The state was the king. His word was law. His will could not be questioned, and he had built around himself a system of control so complete that the lives of his subjects, even the greatest nobles in the land, depended entirely on his favor. This was the king who built Versailles, the most dazzling palace in the world, partly as a beautiful trap to keep his nobility close, watched, and dependent. This was a court of spies and secrets, of careful records and quiet disappearances, where information was power, and the king sat at the center of every web. In such a world, The machinery existed to make a person vanish. The king could issue a sealed order, a document that required no trial, no evidence, no public explanation. With a single such order, a man could be arrested in the night and locked away indefinitely, with no one ever told why. These orders were a tool of absolute power, and they were used more often than we might like to imagine. People could simply disappear into the king's fortresses, swallowed by the stone, forgotten by the world outside. So the masked prisoner was not a crack in the system. He was the system, taken to its furthest extreme. Here was the absolute power of the Sun King made flesh, the ability not only to imprison a man, but to erase his very identity, to hold him for decades without charge, and to command on pain of death that he never speak his own name. But this only deepens the mystery. The king had the power to make anyone disappear. That much is clear. The question is why this particular prisoner required such extraordinary, almost obsessive care. Most of those who vanished into the king's fortresses were simply forgotten, left to rot in obscurity. They did not need masks. They did not need their faces hidden from their own guards. They did not need every object they touched to be destroyed after their death. This man was different. It was not enough that he be imprisoned. It was essential that no one ever know who he was, not the guards who fed him, not the governors who held him, not the world that would one day hear whispered rumors of his existence. The mask was not to keep him in. The walls did that. The mask was to keep his identity out. And there is one more thing worth pausing on. In an age before photographs, before printed identity papers, a person's face was, in a very real sense, their identity. To recognize someone, you had to have seen them, or to have been told by someone who had exactly what they looked like. This is why a mask was such a perfect weapon of erasure. Hide a man's face, forbid anyone to learn his name, and you have not merely imprisoned him, you have unmade him. He becomes a body without an identity, a person who cannot be recognized, vouched for, rescued, or even mourned by anyone who knew the truth. In our modern world, where our faces are captured 100 times a day, it is hard to grasp how completely a mask could swallow a human being in that era. But the men who designed this prisoner's fate understood it perfectly. They were not just hiding a face, they were deleting a person. So what could a man's face possibly reveal that was worth all of this? What secret could be so dangerous that it had to be hidden behind a mask? That is where the great theories begin. Before we turn to the theories, we have to look honestly at the evidence, because the truth is, much of what most people know about the man in the iron mask is not quite true. Start with the mask itself. The image burned into our imagination is one of cold, gleaming iron, a rigid metal cage locked around a man's head, cruel and unbreakable. It is a powerful, haunting picture. But it is very likely a later invention, dramatized and exaggerated by the writers who told his story long after his death. The accounts closer to his own time suggest something different, and in some ways more chilling for its quiet practicality. A mask of black velvet cloth, soft, dark fabric, fastened so that the prisoner's features could not be made out. Not the theatrical iron helmet of legend, but an everyday material doing an extraordinary job, hiding a human face from history. The iron came later, added by storytellers who understood correctly that iron sounds far more terrible than cloth. This is the first great lesson of the mystery. Over the centuries, the legend has grown layers, like rings on a tree. Each generation added its own dramatic touches until the real prisoner was nearly buried beneath the myth. To get anywhere near the truth, we have to peel those layers away and admit how little solid ground remains underneath. What do we actually know? We know there was a real prisoner, held in genuine secrecy, his face deliberately concealed. We know he was moved between fortresses over many years, always in the care of the same jailer. We know the orders surrounding him demanded extraordinary secrecy. We know he died in the Bastille in 1703 and was buried under a false name. These facts are reasonably well supported. But beyond that, the records are maddeningly thin and full of contradictions. The prisoner is referred to by different descriptions in different documents. The few details that survive sometimes point in opposite directions. And the gaps are not accidental. Remember, this was a secret the most powerful government in Europe was actively trying to keep. Papers were destroyed. Names were withheld. The very purpose of the whole operation was to ensure that future historians, that we, would never be able to assemble the full picture. And so we are left with a puzzle deliberately designed to be unsolvable. A handful of true facts surrounded by silence, wrapped in legend. It is precisely this combination, just enough truth to be real, just enough mystery to be irresistible, that has kept the man in the mask alive in our imagination for 3 centuries. Because where the records fall silent, the human mind cannot help but rush to fill the void. And over the years, brilliant minds have done exactly that, proposing one extraordinary theory after another. So, who was the man behind the mask? Across 3 centuries, the answers proposed have ranged from the plausible to the sensational. Let us walk through the greatest of them, one by one. The most famous theory, the one that has captured imaginations more than any other, is the most dramatic of all. It holds that the masked prisoner was a secret brother of the king, perhaps even a twin. Imagine it. The Sun King, Louis XIV, ruler of all France, and somewhere in a hidden cell, a man with the very same face, a brother whose existence threatened everything. For if there were 2 men with an equal claim to the throne, the entire kingdom could be torn apart by civil war. And so, the theory goes, this brother could not be killed. Perhaps the king could not bring himself to murder his own blood, or perhaps killing a royal prince carried its own terrible dangers. But he could not be allowed to walk free either. The solution was monstrous in its elegance: hide his face forever so that no one could ever recognize the resemblance, and lock him away where he could threaten no one. It is a magnificent story. It explains the mask perfectly, a face that was dangerous precisely because it was a royal face. It explains why the prisoner was kept alive rather than executed. And it was this version, dramatized and embellished by the great novelist Alexandre Dumas, that fixed the legend in the popular imagination forever, inspiring countless retellings and films. But here we must be careful. As thrilling as the hidden brother theory is, historians regard it as far more romance than fact. There is little real evidence for a secret royal twin, and a great deal of practical reason to doubt it. The story owes its power to literature, not to documents. It is the version we wish were true, because it is the most satisfying, and that is exactly why we should treat it with caution. So let us turn to the theories that serious historians take more seriously. The leading candidate, The name that appears most persistently in the actual records is a man known as Eustache d'Auger. He surfaces in the documents around the time the mysterious imprisonment began, described as a prisoner to be held under exactly the kind of extreme secrecy our masked man endured. But who was Eustache d'Auger? Here, the trail grows frustratingly faint. He may have been a servant, a valet, a man of relatively low station. And this raises a strange and fascinating possibility that the prisoner was not important because of who he was, but because of what he knew. Picture a servant who, in the course of his ordinary duties, stumbled upon a secret so explosive that it could shake the throne itself. Perhaps he had witnessed something he was never meant to see. Perhaps he had carried messages, or overheard conversations, or been present at some hidden dealing among the powerful. A man like that would be dangerous not for his blood, but for his memory. And the safest thing to do with such a man, too risky to kill openly, too dangerous to free, would be to bury him alive in secrecy, his face hidden so that he could never be identified, never traded, never used by the king's enemies. This idea that the prisoner was dangerous for what he knew rather than who he was fits one of the most unsettling features of the whole affair. Consider how the king's most trusted minister handled the case personally, writing detailed instructions in his own hand about how the man was to be guarded. State business of the highest order does not usually concern itself with a single anonymous prisoner. Ministers ran wars, managed treasuries, governed millions. For one of them to take such close, ongoing interest in the silence of a single masked man suggests that whatever this prisoner held inside his head reached into the very highest levels of the kingdom. And there is a chilling logic to keeping such a man alive. Sometimes the powerful prefer to keep their secrets breathing, locked away where they can be reached if necessary, but never released. Perhaps the masked prisoner was exactly that, a living secret, too valuable to destroy and far too dangerous to free, kept sealed in the dark like a document no one was ever allowed to read. There are other candidates too. Some have suggested a disgraced Italian diplomat, a man caught up in the tangled politics and betrayals between France and the Italian states, who knew too much about secret negotiations. Others have proposed various nobles, soldiers, and officials who fell out of favor and vanished. Each theory has its supporters, its clever arguments, its pieces of circumstantial evidence, and each, in the end, runs into the same wall, the deliberate silence of the records. What is striking is how the leading theories, despite their differences, point toward the same underlying truth. Whether he was a hidden brother, a servant who saw too much, or a diplomat who knew too much, the common thread is this: the man in the mask was a keeper of some secret so dangerous that his very identity had to be destroyed. The mask was not about his crimes. It was about his knowledge, or his blood, about something he was or something he carried that the most powerful king in the world could not allow the future to discover. And that, perhaps, is the most haunting thought of all. Somewhere beneath that velvet mask was a face attached to a secret that died with him in 1703, a secret that the Sun King's machinery of silence guarded so well that 300 years later we still cannot name it. Louis XIV died in 1715, 12 years after his masked prisoner. The Sun King, who had reigned for an astonishing 72 years, who had built Versailles and dominated Europe and bent an entire nation to his will, was laid to rest with all the grandeur of the most powerful monarch of his age. And yet, in a strange twist of history, it is not the king's secrets that have proven immortal. It is the prisoners. Think of the irony. Louis XIV commanded the most complete machinery of secrecy the world had ever seen. He could make men vanish. He could burn papers, destroy records, erase a human being from history with the stroke of a pen. By every measure, the masked prisoner should have disappeared entirely. One more forgotten soul swallowed by the stone, his name and face lost forever. But the very intensity of the secrecy backfired, because here is the truth about hidden things. The harder you work to bury a secret, the more certain people become that something extraordinary lies beneath. The mask, meant to erase the man, instead made him unforgettable. Had the king simply let this prisoner live and die like any other, we would never have heard of him. It was the concealment itself that created the legend. And what a legend it became! Within a few decades of his death, writers and philosophers were already speculating about the masked man's identity. The great writer Voltaire, who had himself spent time imprisoned in the Bastille, helped spread the story and hinted at the royal brother theory. Then came Alexandre Dumas, whose novel transformed the prisoner into one of the most enduring figures in all of fiction. From there, the man in the mask passed into the permanent imagination of the world, into books, into plays, into films, into the very phrase we still use today to describe a hidden, tormented secret. The prisoner who was meant to have no name became one of the most famous nameless men in history. It is worth asking why this particular mystery, out of all the countless secrets buried by history, took such a powerful hold. After all, every age has its vanished prisoners, its hushed-up scandals, its unanswered questions. But the man in the mask has something the others lack: a single, unforgettable image, a human face hidden behind a mask in a cell for a lifetime. It is an image that speaks instantly to something deep in us, the fear of being erased, of being trapped, of carrying a secret we are forbidden ever to tell. We do not need to know the historical details to feel the horror of it. The picture alone does the work. And that, perhaps, is why the legend has outlived almost every other tale from that distant century. So what are we to make of it all, 300 years later? The honest answer is that we still do not know who he was. The leading theories, the servant who knew too much, the diplomat caught in deadly politics, perhaps even some figure close to the throne, remain theories, supported by fragments, defeated by silence. The romantic tale of the secret royal brother endures in our hearts, even as historians shake their heads. The truth lies buried somewhere in the gap between what was recorded and what was destroyed, and it may well stay there forever. But that uncertainty is not a failure of the story. It is the story. The man in the mask reminds us that behind the gold and glory of the grandest courts, there were locked doors and hidden cells, and human beings erased to protect the secrets of the powerful. He stands as a quiet warning about what absolute power can do to a single, inconvenient life, and about how even the mightiest king, who could command silence from everyone around him, could not command it from history forever. We will likely never lift the mask. The face beneath it has long since turned to dust, buried under a false name in a grave that history cannot find. The secret he carried went with him into silence. And so he remains, even now, a man with no name, a face no one ever saw, a prisoner who outlived his king and outlasted his century, the most famous unknown person in the world, forever masked, forever silent, forever asking us the question we cannot answer. Who were you?